Most people believe their identity is the social self, the name, the profession, the roles they play in the world. But behind this facade exists a silent program built from traumas, rejections, and emotional memories. It is this hidden identity that, without us realizing it, guides choices, reactions, and even the way the body responds to the environment. Bruce Lipton shows us that subconscious beliefs shape biology. Cells are constantly reading signals from the internal and external environment, but it is the lens of the unconscious identity that defines what will be perceived as threat or opportunity. In this way, the body adapts not only to the world, but also to the silent narrative we carry within. Joe Dispenza complements this with the neuroscience of the observer. When we remain fused to patterns, the amygdala, the center of fear, dominates our responses. But when we witness thoughts and emotions without identifying with them, we activate the prefrontal cortex, creating space for conscious choice. The observer frees the essential self from the prison of automatic reflexes. This is the great disruption. Changing what is outside does no good if inside, the vibrational signature remains the same. A new job, a new relationship, a new house. All of it can end up recreating the same conflicts if the hidden identity is not revealed and released. The promise of this path is clear: to learn to see the hidden identity not as enemy, but as a program to be witnessed until it dissolves. The practice is quantum mechanics applied to daily life, adjusting the observer, realigning the body, and transforming frequency into new reality. Much of what we live does not arise from conscious choices, but from invisible programs installed throughout life. Experiences of pain, rejection, and frustration create layers of defense that gradually transform into an automatic identity. This identity does not need to be remembered to operate. It runs on its own, like hidden software. We can imagine it like a background program on a computer. You don't see it, you don't interact with it directly, but it consumes energy and directs the functioning of the entire system. The same happens to us. The conscious mind tries to move forward, but the unconscious programming quietly defines the limits. The great challenge is that, because it is invisible, this program is easily confused with "this is just who I am." We don't realize that many automatic reactions, the tendency to remain silent, the difficulty in trusting, the impulse to please to avoid rejection, are not essence, but crystallized memories. This programming is not life's cruelty. It is a survival mechanism. It was created at some point to protect, to ensure we could get through pain. But what once was defense can over time turn into prison, limiting the steps we could take toward the new. Recognizing that there is an invisible program is the first step. Not to destroy it, but to illuminate it with the consciousness of the observer. Once you begin to see the software, it already loses part of its power. The invisible is revealed, and the simple act of witnessing opens space for different choices. The body holds what the mind often forgets. Each trauma, each experience of rejection or fear leaves not only emotional marks, but also physical ones. A defensive posture, shallow breathing, tension in the shoulders or abdomen, all of these are silent records of the hidden identity. Bruce Lipton reminds us that our cells respond to the internal environment as much as to the external. When the unconscious identity vibrates fear, insecurity, or inadequacy, the body translates this into chemistry. Elevated cortisol, contracted muscles, a nervous system on alert. It doesn't matter what the mind says, the body always reveals the real program at work. That's why we so often feel incoherence between what we think and what we live. We say I'm fine, but the heart races. We affirm I trust, but the breath becomes shallow and anxious. The body doesn't lie. It gives away the vibrational signature we are truly sustaining. Observing these physical cues is a path to revelation. More than fighting the symptoms, we can listen to them as messages. A rigid shoulder may be pointing to the difficulty of letting go of control. A knot in the stomach may reveal the fear of not being accepted. The body is a map that translates hidden identity into tangible language. By learning to witness these bodily expressions without judgment, we open space to dissolve old conditionings. The body stops being a prison and becomes a guide, showing exactly where consciousness can act to release the true identity that was hidden. Every emotion we feel is more than just an inner sensation. It is also an emission of energy. The heart and brain, in different emotional states, generate distinct electromagnetic fields that extend beyond the body. Fear, anger, or guilt send one type of signal. Trust, gratitude, and joy send another. Bruce Lipton explains that it is not verbal desire that shapes reality, but the vibrational signature the body emits. You can repeat, "I want prosperity," 1,000 times, but if the predominant frequency is scarcity and anxiety, the field around you responds to that real state, not to your words. This is why many get frustrated with the practice of manifestation. The mind formulates intentions, but the body remains stuck in the emotional tone of the past. Thus, the signal transmitted to the quantum field is confusing, mixing desire with lack. The universe, which responds to coherence, returns only fragmented reflections. The key lies in aligning thought and emotion to create a clear signal. When you think of something desired and simultaneously feel gratitude, calm, or enthusiasm, the field recognizes coherence. It is as if your transmission becomes clear, like a well-tuned radio station. Every state we cultivate is an electromagnetic signature sent to the field. Recognizing this puts us in a position of responsibility and power. It is not only about what we think, but about what we are able to feel as true. Many times we try to change our reality by repeating phrases of power. "I am prosperous. I am loved. Everything works out for me." These affirmations, though beautiful, can sound empty when they find no support in the body. The mind tries to convince, but the nervous system doesn't believe, and the field responds to coherence, not rhetoric. The problem is not the phrase itself, but the emotional disconnection. If someone repeats, "I am at peace," while feeling deep anxiety, the body perceives the contrast and creates even more tension. It is like trying to cover a cracked wall with fresh paint. No matter how many layers you apply, the fissure still shows through. Joe Dispenza teaches that the nervous system distinguishes between the real and the imagined, not by words, but by the emotion involved. If the phrase is repeated without authentic emotional charge, the brain classifies it as irrelevant. This is why many affirmation practices fail. The old emotion continues to dominate the body's chemistry. This does not mean affirmations have no value. It simply means they must be accompanied by vibrational coherence. When you say, "I am prosperous," and at the same time cultivate gratitude for something already present in your life, the phrase takes root emotionally. Coherence turns words into real frequency. Thus, the way forward is not to abandon affirmations, but to reconfigure them, to use them not as empty slogans, but as reminders to awaken a state. The phrase points the direction, but it is coherent emotion that opens the door. In quantum physics, the observer is not passive. The simple act of observing influences the outcome. Something similar happens in our consciousness. When we witness thoughts and emotions without fusing with them, we create space for new possibilities to collapse into form. The hidden identity loses strength when we stop feeding it with automatic identification. Neuroscience shows that when we observe without reacting, old neural networks begin to weaken. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for conscious attention, takes command, while the amygdala, linked to fear and reactivity, loses its dominance. This process opens the way for new mental pathways to form. In practice, this means learning to watch your own thoughts as if they were clouds in the sky. You may notice, here is a fear, here is a painful memory. Instead of fighting, you simply recognize. That simple act changes neural structure because it withdraws fuel from the automatic reaction. In the quantum field, conscious observation also has a creative effect. When we look at an emotion with presence, we are not merely describing, we are offering a vibrational parameter for energy to reorganize. The witnessing gaze is like light passing through shadow, dissolving it effortlessly. The power of the observer is, therefore, the key to transformation. It is not about fabricating a new self, but about revealing the essential self by ceasing identification with the unconscious program. To observe is, in itself, the first act of freedom. For a long time, many of us lived under the sensation that life simply happens to us. Events seem to come from the outside, and we feel like prisoners of circumstance, as if there were no choice. This posture is the direct result of the hidden identity, which operates from contraction and fear, keeping us trapped in the role of passive victim. When we access the consciousness of the observer, something shifts. We realize life is not something that happens against us, but through us. Every emotional state, every silent belief, every daily gesture acts as a frequency emission that organizes events and encounters. We are not loose pieces on a board, but part of the very field that shapes it. This shift in perspective is liberating. Instead of repeating "I have no control," we begin to understand, I can choose the state I sustain, and that state influences my experience. It does not mean controlling every detail, but assuming responsibility for the frequency we emit. In practice, this change can be simple. Faced with an obstacle, instead of reacting with, "Why does this always happen to me?" we can ask, "What in me is being called to reorganize?" This type of question takes us out of the victim role and places us in the position of conscious co-creator. Being a co-creator does not promise a life without pain or challenges, but it does mean living with the awareness that every experience is also a mirror of what we vibrate. The difference is that, instead of being dragged by the current, we learn to navigate with presence, transforming life from the inside out. Many of us believe we need to build a new version of ourselves, as if the essence were broken or incomplete. But the truth is, the essential self already exists. It does not need to be fabricated, only revealed. What distances us from it are the layers of defense and conditioning accumulated throughout life. These layers appear as masks created to survive, pleasing to avoid rejection, hardening to avoid pain, silencing to avoid conflict. They were useful at some point, but over time became confused with identity. We began to believe we were the mask, forgetting that beneath it lies something whole. When we cease the effort of maintaining these masks, the essential nature begins to emerge spontaneously. It is not an act of conquest, but of permission. It is like removing the weight of a stone from atop a spring. The water was always there, it only needed space to flow. In practice, this can be exercised in small gestures. When you choose to act without the obligation to please, or when you allow yourself to be vulnerable instead of hiding pain, you open gaps for the true self to manifest. It is in these moments that we feel relief, as if something within finally breathed. Discovering that the essential self already exists is a turning point. We stop searching outside for the promise of wholeness and begin cultivating within the courage to release layers. The work is not to become someone new, but to remember who you always were before the defenses. The quantum field does not respond to what we say in words, but to the state we sustain. When thoughts, emotions, and gestures are misaligned, the signal sent is diffuse, like a light bulb glowing without focus. But when there is coherence, that same signal concentrates and gains strength, becoming capable of reorganizing the reality around us. Greg Braden describes coherence between the heart and brain as a measurable electromagnetic pattern. When we cultivate gratitude, compassion, or genuine trust, the heart emits an ordered frequency that influences not only the body, but also the field we are immersed in. The universe recognizes this clear signal and responds in resonance. Bruce Lipton adds that this coherence creates a favorable internal environment. Beliefs, emotions, and cellular chemistry begin to tell the same story. In this state, the body stops living in survival mode and opens itself to growth, healing, and creation. Biology becomes an ally of expansion. In practice, coherence manifests through simple actions. Thinking of something you desire while simultaneously feeling gratitude for small evidences already present. Aligning an intention with a corresponding gesture. Breathing rhythmically while sustaining an elevated emotion. These moments create the vibrational signature that the field recognizes. When we enter coherence, manifestation ceases to be effort and becomes consequence. Life reorganizes not through imposition, but through resonance. It is as if the external world begins to play the same note already vibrating within us. The human brain has an extraordinary capacity to rewire itself, neuroplasticity. Every time we repeat a thought or an emotion, we strengthen neural connections that make that state more accessible. This is how patterns of fear and insecurity consolidate, through automatic repetition. But it is also how we can create new pathways of freedom. When we choose to witness a thought without reacting, or sustain a state of gratitude for a few moments, we are literally training the brain for a new pattern. These seconds of conscious presence act as seeds. With time and repetition, Those seeds create neural pathways as strong as the old ones, replacing limiting conditioning. Brain states such as theta, alpha, and gamma favor this process. In theta, the brain is more open to suggestion and reprogramming. In alpha, there is relaxation and creative focus. In gamma, there is heightened integration of perception. Practices of breathing, meditation, and mindfulness help access these states, amplifying the power of conscious repetition. This is why daily micro-practices are more effective than occasional big efforts. 30 seconds of presence, repeated several times throughout the day, have more impact than one long attempt without continuity. The brain responds to habit, not isolated intensity. Neuroplasticity reminds us that we are not trapped by the invisible program. Each choice to observe instead of react, to breathe instead of contract, to give thanks instead of complain, strengthens a new pathway. The hidden identity begins to dissolve as conscious repetition gives form to the essential identity. Surrender is often confused with giving up, but in truth, it is an act of vibrational intelligence. Letting go of control does not mean folding your arms. It means ceasing to fight against the natural flow and choosing to align with it. It is an act of trust in life, of allowing the field to show pathways beyond what the mind can predict. We can imagine water flowing toward a rock. It does not force its way head-on, wasting energy in the clash. It simply flows around the obstacle and continues toward the sea. So it is with micro-surrender, small acts of letting life adjust itself without the urgency of proving, fixing, or resisting. These moments of release can appear in details, taking a deep breath before responding to criticism, choosing not to insist on a plan that refuses to advance, allowing silence when the mind demands haste. Each micro-surrender is a reminder that the flow is wiser than the anxiety for control. When we practice conscious surrender, the body responds as well. The nervous system calms, the breath deepens, the energy reorganizes. This physiology of trust creates space for new synchronicities to emerge. The field does not need to be forced. It harmonizes naturally when there is openness. Micro-surrender teaches us that living in trust is not passivity, but collaboration. It is walking with life, allowing it to show, step by step, the most coherent path. In this state, the essential identity not only emerges, it finds space to move naturally in the world. Bruce Lipton reminds us that inherited and subconscious beliefs shape biology. But when we begin to reprogram these beliefs with awareness and coherent emotion, we create a new cellular environment. The body stops repeating old patterns of defense and begins to respond with vitality to higher states of trust and expansion. Neville Goddard reinforces this vision with his key principle: live in the end. He invites us to feel and embody now the version of ourselves that is already free from the limited identity. It is not about waiting for external proof, but about adopting as natural the sensation of being whole. The synthesis is clear. The hidden self does not need to be fought or destroyed. It needs to be understood, witnessed, and gently dissolved until it makes space for the essential self. Transformation does not happen when we create a new character, but when we release the masks and remember the essence that has always been present. A practical invitation can help anchor this process. Choose a frequency word as your daily signature. It may be trust, wholeness, presence. Repeat it throughout the day, not as an empty slogan, but as a bodily reminder, aligning posture, breath, and gesture with that quality. Small daily acts give shape to the new identity. And so, we discover that change is not about forcing a new landscape, but about changing the lens. When we change the lens, we not only change what we see, we change the very light with which the whole world is revealed.